public board before Christmas. Lovely to see so many of you virtually today. And just before we get going, we're going to have a couple of celebrations. The first is today is the last board meeting for Frank Myers. Frank has been a non-executive director at Wye Valley for, I think, 12 years. He's the longest serving non-executive in the country. And I would just like to thank again Frank for his extraordinary efforts over the years to make Wye Valley Trust a better trust for the citizens that we all try and serve. Frank, you have been an absolute example and legend of what public service means. So thank you on behalf of everyone in Herefordshire, Frank, for the work you do. And I know your volunteering in different forum will continue. You are a friend of the trust, you're a friend of mine, and we will miss you. Thank you, Frank. I'd also like to celebrate those some going the extra mile quarter two winners. And first of all, our team of the quarter, who actually can't be with us, but I want to celebrate Kelly Moran and Laura Morris. I'll just read out the nomination. Kelly and Laura dealt with an emergency situation on the hospital site. The situation was sudden and traumatic in nature. They both displayed expert problem solving and decision making, methodically working everything through and making sure safety precautions were taken at all stages. Kelly displayed caring and compassion in dealing with emergency contacts by phone amidst a very complex set of circumstances. They both enacted this whilst also managing a hospital under significant pressure from a flow and discharge perspective. They remained calm and focused throughout the shift in spite of what happened. The way they worked was awe-inspiring and humbling to see, and they are both a credit to Wye Valley Trust. Kelly and Laura, I know you can't be with us, but a big round of applause. Thank you very, very much. We know that was a very difficult day for everyone, and we really appreciate what you did for us. But our employee of the month, individual of the quarter, is Mike Wilmot. Mike, welcome. Lovely to see you with us today. Mike has, since March, I think, 2021, completed over 1,600 hours of volunteering within the very successful pharmacy run service, distributing medication around the hospital. Mike was chosen due to his admirable commitment to 3 shifts a week. Mike, you're a hero. He's also quick to respond when there's a gap in the rota, and we've even seen him volunteering on Christmas Day armed with sweets. Mike is incredibly knowledgeable, experienced and committed to the role of being a volunteer, and is a valued member of the pharmacy team. He's also very humorous, friendly and great fun to work alongside. You can give whoever said that Mike a fiver later. In addition to the pharmacy role, under supervision of ward dietitians, Mike assists with meal monitoring on the wards to monitor mealtime service to ensure patients are best prepared and supported with good hand and food hygiene to optimise their dietary intake. Further still, Mike still maintains a garden by our discharge lounge and purchases plants as a gift so patients can enjoy the view so they as they wait for their return home. Mike, generally, I'm a very big fan of volunteering. I think for people who are retired or are looking for a purpose in life, it's a wonderful thing to do, and you're absolutely an exemplar. We can't thank you enough. And we know there's many other great volunteers in the organisation, but Mike Wilmot, you are our individual Going the Extra Mile award winner for quarter 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. You take care, Mike. You're very welcome to join us. And if I don't see you before Christmas, have a wonderful Christmas.
I've got a pharmacy shift that's just started, so I'm on my way now.
Okay, put your running shoes on, Mike, and enjoy.
Okay.
Take care. Glenn Burley, our chief executive, has been delayed in another meeting, but hopefully will be with us by the time we get to his report. Otherwise, I will reshuffle the agenda. So we have apologies for absence from Ellie Bulmer. Do we have any other apologies, Erica?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Any new declarations of interest, colleagues? Please raise a digital hand. Frank?
Yeah, I've been appointed chair of Community First in Herefordshire and Worcestershire is the charity title, and it includes amongst its portfolio the Recovery and Wellbeing College contract issued by no other than Alan Dawson and signed by Simon Trickett, so it needs to be recorded.
Okay, thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
And we'll move on then if there are no others. The minutes of the meeting held on the 5th of October. If you have any adjustments to those, could you please raise a digital hand? Can't see any digital hands raised, so we go to the action points arising, which are on page 24. The first was for Katie to provide an update to the next board of directors on the underlying cash plan. We will do that further, I think, in January. I think, is that correct, Katie?
Yes, Chair. So there's some information in today's papers and we'll continue that in January.
Super. And the second one was for us to share the mid-year review with the board of directors, and that's included within the plan review paper. So thank you for that as well, Katie. Are there any matters arising that I've missed? Some say that leadership is often the art of good timing, and perfectly timed is the arrival of Glenn Burley, our Chief Executive. So, Glenn, get us going with your Chief Executive's report, please.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for being slightly late for the start of the meeting. So, a few things to talk through here. Firstly, and the biggest item is the update on the NHS operational and financial plan, which is later on our agenda in terms of the implications for us. But what I do here in my report is set the scene on that, which is quite a long and difficult and fruitless discussion with the Treasury around NHS funding, which I refer to here. There was an ask for around £2 billion to come into the NHS to cover a range of things, mainly on the back of the impact of industrial action, but also some additional pressures and some inflationary pressures. Unfortunately, for all sorts of reasons, the Treasury was unable to provide any additional funding. So what we had to play with as an NHS is the 200 million that I referred to in a previous board report that was allocated as additional funding in the summer. That hadn't been allocated out to systems though. And so as part of this revised settlement, that together with some additional funding from national budgets has been pushed out into individual integrated care systems and then allocated down to trusts like ours through an approach based on headcount because of the impact of industrial action, but then also a slight change to the way the thresholds for payments for elective activity work. And because it wasn't the amount of money the NHS asked for, the government asked the NHS whether we wanted to reprioritise some things. They made it really clear that urgent care was not to be compromised, but there was an option to go slower on elective recovery. I'm pleased to say that we haven't taken that route as an organisation, and indeed we haven't done that across the group. I worry about the relationship between elective care and urgent care, obviously worry about patients waiting a long time on the waiting list. So the plan that we'll look at later from our perspective will try to ensure that we deliver our financial plan alongside the original pledges on performance. We tweaked some of the trajectories on urgent care, but we will still be attempting to do all the things we were aiming to do at the start of the year. So that will be, that is a very challenging position for us, and we'll talk through some of the variation in that later. This has also triggered a bit of a discussion about headcount in the NHS and a challenge back to the NHS that we've increased our headcount over the last few years. If you compare the situation now to the pre-COVID days, then there's a 15-20% increase in headcount. And some of that is delivering more activity, as indeed we can point to in our numbers. Some of it, though, necessarily isn't. Some of it has increased quality. So if we take the increases in midwifery staffing, for example. So there is a challenge for us, particularly as we, with all the pressure on public funding, that we go back and look at our headcount increases, and we'll be doing that as part of our planning cycle this year, and ensure that we've got best value out of all of those things. I then refer to the Intelligent Board, and linked to this point, the updated document that's being pulled together will encourage boards to have open conversations about productivity. I worry a little bit over the last few years it's been harder for boards to talk about productivity, because obviously we spend a lot of time talking about quality, but if we can improve productivity, we can spend more to deliver more care or better care. So it's an important relationship between the two issues. I then referenced volunteering. We had a great talk from Thomas Hughes Hallett at our 4 boards meeting that we held last month, and he followed that up at the Chief Nurses Conference, and actually said some positive things about what's going on in the group. And I know Lucy's been in touch with him to talk about the great work we're already doing on volunteering at Wye Valley, but also the opportunities to do some more. And there's some good examples here, but also across the group on some innovative ways of using volunteers. I then referenced the Association of Groups work on leadership, and what we're seeking to do at the group level. Now we have 4 great trusts in the group, is to bring that middle management cohort together a little bit more, to do some webinars and teach-ins on some important subjects. So we're getting that program together right now. And then I'll go into the more from our great teams, and there's a great update here from our outpatient team, and this particularly referencing some of the work they've been doing on Super Saturday, so clinics that are set up to do additional activity. And this has been also part of the work we've been doing with the National Further Faster programme that's been led by Tim Briggs. And it's great to see Wye Valley on those calls with other parts of the group and sharing some of the things we're doing with the rest of the NHS. And this also references the activity levels that we've been doing both in outpatients and inpatients, which I mentioned earlier. Cancer services, lots going on here, and it is a challenging area. So when we look at the performance report in a moment, our cancer 62-day backlog is something that we need to ensure that we can address that in a more positive way than we have so far. There's a lot of work going on with this. There's increased demand, but as you can see from the elements within this section of the report, there's a lot of innovation going on, a lot of changes to pathways that will mean that we're delivering for faster care to our patients. So I'm confident we've got a plan to improve that, but we're in a position where we do need to make some improvements. Diagnostics relates to that also, and again some explanations of some of the things they've been doing there together with pharmacy. Our pharmacy team have been challenged through recruitment challenges, and you can see here some examples of how through international recruitment and more training posts they're addressing that. And then finally the pathology team, and again this is a contribution towards those cancer pathways. It's good to see the support across the group around histopathology, and the report goes through the progress we're making on networking within the pathology team. And then finally the Going the Extra Mile awards, the team of the quarter and the employee of the quarter are all listed there at the back of the report. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chairman.
No, that's great, thank you. And we celebrated Mike, one of our volunteers, just before you joined, on the Going the Extra Mile award winners. Glenn, any questions or perspectives to Glenn? Glenn, just before we move on to the integrated performance report and Jane, just I'll ask Francis and Nicola now put their hands up. I'll let them go first. Francis?
Thanks, Glenn. A very comprehensive report. And obviously we're disappointed about the funding settlement, but definitely support the view that we have to focus on urgent and emergency care, but don't want our long waiters to to sort of cease to be a priority for us. So, you know, I think we are all committed to trying to do them in tandem, aren't we? Just despite the funding restrictions, and that's where the productivity and our partnership with general practice and local authority and other colleagues is so critical to keep the flow going. So it is hard to spin so many plates, but certainly don't want people who've been waiting a very long time for treatment to have to wait even longer.
And we heard this morning in our board workshop, Francis, didn't we, the great work that's going on with our primary care colleagues in the One Herefordshire Partnership to try and ensure that more and more of our care is provided at community level to the betterment of our citizens. Nicola?
Yes, as you said, Glenn, we've had an increase in headcount, so we've got more people, and maybe it's a question for Jeffrey later, actually. But just observing with all those new people, do we really understand how quickly they become effective, and how long does it take to embed and be part of that productivity cycle? Because not only do you get the strain of the new person, the people that were there already also get that strain and get that slowdown as you onboard a new person. And I just wondered, do we understand what that's looked like, given we have made a substantial increase in turnover and new recruits? So it's going to have an impact. And I think the one thing that I suppose has shocked me coming into the NHS from the outside, you can be perfectly qualified, you can be experienced for many years, but this hospital might have different IT systems to the one you've just come from, and it takes time to learn the new process. So yeah, that is, I say, not necessarily one for an answer, but maybe one to explore with Jeffrey later.
Good challenge, Nicola. And also we know, had an awful lot of our most experienced members of staff retire over the last few years, and our more experienced members of staff are normally our more productive members of staff. Glenn, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, Nicola makes a really important point, and I think it helps to emphasise how you can't just look at headcount and acuity through a financial model or an analytical model. I think you do need to understand the skills and experience of your workforce, the changes that we're making around things like IT that can hopefully increase productivity, but sometimes don't. So that all of those things need to come into the mix, and I think one of the other problems with the growth in establishment across the NHS at the moment has been a lot of that is being fulfilled through agency and temporary staff, and agency and temporary staff are okay, but they don't understand the local systems and processes. They're higher costs, so sometimes the productivity gets worse when you chase those establishments through agency. So I think it's a really important message for us to look at it in the round, rather than just thinking that more activity means more staff. It has to be about working smarter.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you, Glenn. And so we'll move on to Jane. Jane, when you're giving the overview, could you maybe just touch on the issue of, and we had this in a patient story this morning, how good we are and relatively on ambulance handovers, but the consequence that has on how full our ED department is. Jane, over to you.
I will do. So yeah, I was going to do my sort of joining the dots in introduction. So I was going to start off with a bit of, so we've seen some of the impact of some of the industrial action that happened in September and October in this report, and that also has an impact on cost, and I know Katie will come back to that. So regardless of that, we still remain one of the highest performing, in fact most of the time the top performing in terms of activity across the region compared to our 2019 baseline. And it's really good to see that actually our numbers of patients waiting over 52 weeks who are on the waiting list for more than a year, that started to come down. Now, people will have seen in the media that actually waiting lists have been going up, but actually those long waiters have really started to come down. So where we are today, I think we've got 1,825 people waiting over a year. So that's a lot of people waiting a really long time. but that's come down in the last 6 weeks from over 2,000. So that's really good to start to see that shift, and that's based on both on the activity that we've done, and some of that has been some productivity improvement as well, as Glenn was talking about, but we've got more to go on that. So just going back to the industrial action, so I'm hopeful that the consultants will accept the deal that the BMA have recommended to them after the negotiation. I think it is hugely disappointing that the recently announced junior doctor action over that Christmas and particularly post-Christmas period seems designed for maximum impact, I would say, on patient safety. We always know that is the most difficult week of the year, and so I can only hope that something happens before then. Lots of planning going on to how we mitigate those risks, but it's a time when people are on holiday, and so I think it's really hugely concerning, and again will have an impact on some of our planned elective patients. There's no doubt we'll have to make some cancellations. As we speak, we're in the middle of a CQC inspection, which was an unannounced one, which is in our emergency department. So what they will be seeing there is a huge amount of redesign that we've put in over the last few months, particularly the co-location of our frailty same-day emergency care service and the virtual ward. We talked about that a little bit this morning with our GP colleagues, and them starting to see that being parts of the jigsaw that are coming together in a much more comprehensive way, in the way that they can interact with that. So that's really good. And we've got a surgical same-day emergency care unit that is going to open before Christmas. So both those things are good. So the CQC will be seeing that, but they will also be observing a hugely pressured emergency department, very congested, and some pretty exhausted staff. So we are getting some feedback from them later today from their 3-day visit. You mentioned about ambulance handovers, and that is something that we've really concentrated on. And part of that, I think, is our whole approach to, we feel that we are part of the system. We are not just an acute hospital and a community services provider. We are absolutely part of a whole system, and so as part of that, we have as much responsibility as anybody else does to make sure that ambulances are freed from ED and can get quickly to patients at home. And we know from some of the figures that we do well on that. One of the implications of that, and also as part of reducing the congestion in ED, is the boarding policy, and Lucy will talk through that in her part of the report, because again that has an impact, again, pressures on patients and pressures on staff where we've got congestion that we ideally wouldn't have. We've got a lot of work going on with our social care partners, what we've called a discharge to assess sprint, which is looking at and redesigning our discharge pathways. We think there's a lot more that we can get out of those and much better flow. So that work started in earnest, and John Barnes and Hilary Hall from the council are leading that work. And so I'm hopeful that will make some difference. It's not going to be very quick, but it certainly should be this winter. As Glenn mentioned, a bit concerned about our cancer performance, particularly around our faster diagnostic standard, and Andy will cover that. We've got some good people metrics. I won't go through those. Other to mention, it's been really good to note that we've now had confirmation that the new immigration rules for international recruits, being able to bring dependents in, is not going to be impacting our NHS overseas recruitment, and we still have a lot more staff to join us, and we know many of those, our nursing and our medical staff, do bring their families, and that's an important feature of why they want to be here, is they can also bring their families with them and create that life. So really good news for the NHS that that rule doesn't apply, but very worrying for social care. We know that our nursing homes in particular are very dependent on this international recruitment, and so that inevitably is going to have an impact on them. The last thing I was just going to say was around just about our financial position. We obviously are a little bit adrift from where we wanted to be at this point of the year, and again Katie will pick that up under her report on the agenda.
Super, very comprehensive. Thank you, Jane. Any questions or perspectives to Jane? Otherwise, we'll move to Lucy and Chisholm. Okay, as you say, Jane, the ED department is a balance of risk, isn't it? If we are very effective at ambulance unloading, it frees up that ambulance to go and find someone who is in real need of an ambulance pickup, and the alternative of holding on to the ambulance, so to speak, is suboptimal for other people. It's the whole system risk we need to look at. So Lucy and Chizu, Lucy first on the quality and safety area, please.
Yes, certainly, and then I'll hand over to Chizu for the mortality section. So just for colleagues, the last time we met, we presented our local patient safety incident response plan, and that was approved by board. I'm pleased to report that the associated policy framework and processes associated that have been endorsed by our integrated care colleagues, and we have moved successfully on to PSERF at the beginning of November. So we're one of a handful of trusts in the country that have moved into that framework in November on the back of the new National Patient Safety Strategy. A national document was published around that transition period between the old framework, which was the serious incident framework, and then the local patient safety incident response plan. National documentation's been produced that enables you to close down the old process as swiftly and safely and robustly as possible in order to be able to deal with the brand new patient safety response plan. So we're working with colleagues on those current serious incidents that remain open to be able to see those to their conclusion as swiftly as possible so that we can focus on the new framework. I'm sure everybody round the board table noticed the cold weather last weekend, and with the cold weather comes all of those winter viruses that can cause additional pressure on our services. And we have seen an increase in norovirus outbreaks, an increase in COVID-19 positive cases attending our hospital, and we're starting to see influenza, which you would expect at this time of year. We do our very best to keep areas open and isolate patients appropriately, but keep the area open to admissions and discharges and not block beds unnecessarily. But that can increase pressure on the front door and on our bed base. All I can say to the public who are listening is get vaccinated if you're eligible for vaccination, wash your hands regularly, and if you are visiting areas within our hospitals where we require you to wear a face mask, if we could ask colleagues to wear face masks in those areas to keep our staff at work and our patients safe. Sorry. We're pleased to announce that we've identified non-exec colleagues to link with frontline services teams and wards to build relationships and increase visibility from ward to board. And we know that our clinical areas and departments are really pleased and welcome that opportunity. On the back of that, we presented a revised approach to our patient safety walkabouts at Quality Committee last week, and that was approved. So there'll be the safety walkabouts that take place between the NED, the non-executive links to clinical areas, and then there'll also be a schedule of executive-led safety walkabouts. We already have those in place. The new revised approach is just about collating the information and feedback from those and having some oversight of the improvements that might be made on the back of those safety walkabouts. I do want to talk about boarding, and I just want to remind staff what we mean by boarding. So in October 2022, we introduced a boarding policy which was designed to ease and reduce the pressures of within the emergency department, decongest the emergency department, and enable ambulance offloads that Jane alluded to previously. There are two types of boarding. There's what we call proactive boarding, which is where we will choose to board patients against predicted discharges, so the profile of discharges in a ward, and move the discharges out into a non-bed space and admit the admissions into the discharge bed space. We do that proactively, but at times of absolute pressure, so when ED is congested or when ambulances are having difficulty offloading, we introduce something called reactive boarding, which is actually boarding patients in non-designated bed spaces on wards, not against the predicted discharge, and those patients may well stay in that non-designated bed space for a period of time, or indeed the whole of their admission. We know that that's not great experience for our patients. They are in a non-designated bed space without a call bell, without those facilities that people are offered when they're in an actual hospital bed space. And we know that it's not great for staff experience, just in terms of the additional pressure that causes. You can see within the report that over the last few weeks, the number of boarders on our wards each day has been increasing. And during the month of October, at its peak, we saw 480 boarders. And at the peak, we saw sort of 30 boarders a day on our wards, both day and night. I have to say, I talked to a number of boarding patients myself at the back end of last week, and overall our patients are happy to be cared for and are very obliging and considerate of the space that they're cared for. However, we have seen an increasing number of complaints and feedback from patients and our staff around how care is compromised in those spaces, in terms of the space to care for patients, the space to deal with emergency situations, and the fact that privacy and dignity can't be honoured as much as it can be when a patient's in a bed space behind curtains. We know that our long-term strategy is not to build more beds, because we would just fill them, and we may continue to have boarders. And we know that our long-term strategy is around care closer to home, using our admission pathways to avoid admission where possible. You've already heard about the discharge sprint that Jane alluded to, our home by lunch campaign, expansion of the virtual ward, expansion of same-day emergency care. We agreed at Quality Committee to continue to present a monthly report on boarders, and we've agreed to add some additional measures to the boarding report for consideration, and we're happy to present more information on that to board as required. Other colleagues may well want to add to that, given that they are involved in some of the longer term strategies for dealing with boarding, and then clearly I'll hand over to Chizo for mortality. Thank you.
Sorry, before we go to Chizo, Jane, just give us a flavour, if you could, of how the discharge, or how many people are ready for discharge but were unable to discharge because of social care problems at the moment.
Andy's probably got the figure in the top of his head. We're usually somewhere between 50 and 60 at any one time who are patients who are ready to go home, but Andy's probably got today's figure. Andy, what's the latest number?
44 currently, Chair. Mixture of Herefordshire, Powys, Worcester and Shropshire delays.
Okay, great. And just again, before we move on to Chizo, it's important we discuss this, guys, but it's taking a long time. Glenn?
Yeah, in addition to those that require social care support, there's a number of other patients who we could discharge quicker ourselves. So I think it's important for us to focus on the improvements that we can make internally in that as well, with decision making, with diagnostics. I was just going to emphasise the point that Lucy made, and you made it earlier, Chairman, that we know for individual patients that boarding is not as good as not boarding. You know, we would love to just have the right number of patients on the ward and not extend that in the way that we are. But we are doing this because of the other patient that is waiting in the community for that ambulance, that is waiting at the front door of the hospital, and it is about trying to balance that That could be a child needing resus, it could be a relative with a stroke, and it really is just about making sure that our public, who are very understanding, understand that that's the balance of judgment that we're making on this.
No, absolutely, and for our regulatory friends also to recognise that as well. Chizu, in terms of mortality, anything you particularly wanted to brief us on?
Yes, so when you look at the 12-month rolling mortality SHIMI indicator, there's just been a slight increase from previous months. And looking at the data, we would expect a further increase in the next few months. There seems to be due to an increase in pneumonia deaths, which wasn't in the previous months. There was also a slight increase in our stroke deaths, but our stroke SHIMI remains very good and remains one of the best in the country. But in month, there had been more than expected for that diagnostic group. We continue to work towards expanding the medical examiner scrutiny of community deaths out and hope to be ready before 1st of April.
Okay, great. Thank you, Chizu. Any questions to Chizu? Please raise a digital hand. Okay, we'll move on then. So, Andy, things are really obviously very busy in the engine room, so to speak. Operationally, how are you seeing things?
Thanks, Russell. Yeah, a busy agenda as we face the winter pressures, as Jane's already alluded to. We've got 9 days of industrial action pre and post the festive period that we are busy planning and prepping for, and I'd just like to thank the teams in advance of that period, because it is going to be, on top of that normal winter pressures, is going to be a really challenging time. But as I've put in my report, we continue our focus on improving our urgent and emergency care performance, improving our cancer standards, and reducing our long-waited elective patients. Just on the start with the urgent and emergency care front, lots of ongoing work, considerable amount of work that I would struggle to put in this report, all the detail that we are undertaking, but some of the highlights, and we have mentioned some of them, is the operational implementation of our frailty SDEC, co-located with virtual ward, which is seeing increased utilisation of our virtual ward through that co-location advantage that we have on the acute floor. We have also expanded our discharge lounge, so as Lucy referred to there in terms of that discharge boarding profile, and we're hoping that we can reduce that number of discharge boarding patients by increasing our discharge lounge capacity, which we have successfully done over the last couple of weeks, both the floor space and the resource in our discharge lounge, and we've seen increased utilisation of our discharge lounge, and the percentage of patients that are leaving our wards by lunchtime, which should be around 30%, has increased over the last 6 weeks from 15% to 22%. So we are utilising our discharge lounge and preventing boarding on our wards. We're also using our discharge lounge, which is also combined with our medical day case, by streaming patients that are currently in our same day emergency acute floor area to medical day case for procedures to try and free up more SDEC footprint and capacity. And as James already alluded to, we are increasing both our medical and surgical footprint for SDEC ahead of the Christmas period. We've already mentioned a lot of the D2A work that John Barnes and is leading across Herefordshire, but just wanted to flag that there's lots of DTA, discharge to assess work happening across the acute trust, particularly around standardising our estimated discharge date, which is setting a realistic but challenging date, and ensuring that linked into our discharge planning processes, along with increasing our ward-based flow and discharge coordinators. Moving on to cancer, which is probably my biggest area of concern as the Chief Operating Officer, and those concerns are mirrored by the ICS and regionally. And this is all driven, a lot of our cancer performance, by our challenges and our 28-day faster diagnosis standard. It is not where it needs to be, and we are off trajectory. There's lots of work ongoing within the teams to address some of that, and there's, as we speak, there are deep dives ongoing currently with each of the 5 main specialties, which have got the biggest challenge. Those are lower GI, upper GI, gynae, breast and urology. But there's various things going to be undertaken to address some of those concerns. We are going to be looking at implementing text messaging for patients with benign results, so we can stop their 28-day clock and reassure patients that they don't have cancer. As Glenn already alluded to, in terms of Super Saturday sessions, we're increasing Super Saturday sessions in January and across Q4. We've got fecal testing in primary care that's just gone live in the last couple of weeks, and hopefully that will reduce our endoscopy cancer referrals by anything between 15 and 25%, therefore maximising our endoscopy capacity. And we've got a cancer navigator who started in histology to drive down some of the barriers and issues within our histology reporting and specimen reviews. So lots going on in cancer, and I'm confident we can get back on trajectory and deliver 75% faster diagnosis in March, and obviously the impact then on our 62 days. In terms of long waiting electives, lots going on there. We are working across the foundation group to maximise our mutual aid offering. Jane's already alluded to the value-weighted activity that the trust sees as the top of the region, or at least second from top of the region, both on not just activity but complexity and treatment received for patients. A couple of other successes in terms of our elective pathways. In October, we were the highest in the region with the percentage of the March 62-week risk cohort patients being seen and having a first appointment booked by the end of December. We were the leading trust in the region for the percentage of patients there, and we're now focusing on making sure that all our 52-week wait patients that are waiting at the end of March are seen for a first outpatient appointment by the end of March next year, which is part of our Faster Further offering. We've also delivered great.
Sorry, Andy, I need us all to speed up a bit more. We're
okay, yeah.
late now.
Yeah, I just want to mention that we've also validated over 90% of our patients on our waiting list that have waited 12 weeks or more, which is a significant achievement for the trust. Our diagnostic performance and our activity is well above plan, and we're starting to see some improvements in our theatre utilisation by focusing on scheduling and having one-to-one conversations with our general surgery and urology consultants about retrospectively reviewing their theatre lists and increasing their productivity. And finally, we've also just completed 2 weeks of an orthopaedic perfect week where we've seen increased utilisation of theatres, and more on that to come in due course. Thank you, Russell.
Okay, no, thank you. I'm trying to keep things going, guys, because I know you're very busy and I want us to get through the board meeting as efficiently as possible. Questions and perspectives to Andy. Really great, comprehensive description of everything going on, Andy. Glenn?
Yeah, I was just going to pick up on the cancer point I made earlier. Whilst I agree that our faster diagnostic standard is the area where we can make improvements, it was the 62-day backlog that triggered a bit of national interest, so we do need to keep an eye on that as well.
Andy, anything you want to say on that?
Yeah, absolutely. We're currently slightly off trajectory. We've got to get to 71 by the end of March. Today, as it stands, we're at 108, so not as bad as it was a week or so ago, and we're monitoring that on a daily basis.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, we'll move on then, guys. Can I ask executive directors to be succinct? That would be helpful. Chizu, sorry, getting excited. Done, Chizu. Jeffrey.
Oh, thank you, Russell. Well, just some key points from our report, just to say staff turnover continues to improve, and we now have the lowest turnover at the trust over the last 4 years. We will continue to take active steps to fill our clinical vacancies over the coming months. I talked about the chart of international staff, which we now have in place to show our support to international staff. We've also adopted the NHS Sexual Safety Charter, which reaffirms our commitment to eradicate harassment and bullying in the workplace. We are delivering and expanding on our Grow Our Own strategy with 25 training nurse associates commencing their placements at the University of Worcester come March time. And finally, we are actively promoting Disability History Month to raise awareness and support for those with a disability. And we will continue to manage sickness absence in a compassionate way over the winter months. Those are the key things I wanted to highlight, Russell. Happy to take any questions.
That's great. Any questions or perspectives to Jeffrey? Jeffrey presented to us, so members of the public are aware of and the important work we're doing on equality, diversity and inclusion, and that is a real focus for us going forwards, but some great positive changes, as Nicola's mentioned in the chat box, Jeffrey, so keep up the good work. Thank you very much. And Katie, the money's looking difficult. Tell us about the money.
Thank you, Chair. So this reported in the IPR covers the year-to-date position to the end of October, so month 7. Our position remains stable in months, so our year-to-date deficit stands at 17.6 million, or 2 million adverse to plan. And as we've said throughout today already, there is significant pressure on our finances, and the separate paper today sets out our assessment of the forecast. As Glenn's report covered, we're experiencing the same challenges being seen across the wider NHS around inflation, recruitment challenges and demand pressures, and they all contribute to our adverse variance to plan. We are reporting under delivery on our efficiency programme, and as a result we've increased the oversight of that, and through our mid-year review that we'll come on to shortly, we have focused on mitigations around improving the run rate between now and the end of the year and into next year, although recognising much of that is likely to be delivered non-recurrently at this point, and we do need recurrent sustainable solutions. In terms of the elective performance, Andy's already described our sustained focus on elective recovery, and we've seen that translated through in terms of variable elective income, which has continued to improve, and from a year-to-date perspective, by the end of October, is in line with plan. What we do know, though, is that large elements of that activity is delivered through temporary capacity, which inevitably has a lower margin financially, and so that ongoing focus on productivity is absolutely key in terms of that improvement. In terms of capital and cash, so capital spend is just under £12 million year to date, and the only thing to highlight to board is there is some tension around the phasing of some of the funding available on national programmes, and we're working with national and regional colleagues to mitigate that across the year end. In terms of cash, and I do need something minuted through board if colleagues are happy today, so our cash support for December has been approved nationally. We've submitted the application for support during Q4, and as part of the process we do need board endorsement to those revenue support requests. So I know we covered that at the beginning of the year, but we are asked explicitly on every submission, so if we could, if colleagues are comfortable, endorse that board approval for those cash requests today, that would be really helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Katie. Any questions to Katie? Two hands up. Sue came up first. Glenn?
I may not have reported earlier, but we have had our national review meeting with the Chief Finance Officer, which was reasonably okay from a Wye Valley perspective, and the issues we'll talk about later. One of the things that, though, I think we do need to look at more carefully is our agency usage. Obviously, we've just seen some really promising numbers in terms of recruitment and turnover. I think we should have another look at some of the processes around agency nurse approvals and raise this with the exec team. So I think it's something we'll come back to, and a general tightening up of that over the final part of the year should help us to get back on plan.
Yeah, we want to give the agencies foreknowledge of shifts to help them to fill it, but equally, really, we want those shifts to be filled by bank staff. Kieran? If you're talking, Kieran, you're on mute. Okay.
4 quick linked questions, and it relates to page 54 of the papers, and it relates to cash. The first is we've put in the request that Katie just referred to of 9.89 million for PDC funding. First question is that subject to dividends? The second question is, if it is one by one. Kieran. Okay.
So, Katie, is that subject to dividends?
We've just received the paperwork here, and so I do need to review that, but my understanding would be yes, but I will review and confirm.
Okay, thank you.
The second question is, if it is subject to dividends, which you've just said yes, to what extent is that covered by the costings in the capital developments associated with the request for extra funding, as opposed to just getting extra PDC funding to cover overspends?
Katie, do you want to come in on that, or do you want to have a thing?
I think I'd prefer to review that and come back to you, Kieran, if that's okay.
Okay.
Okay. The third question is, you refer to another request in Q4, but it doesn't give a value.
Yeah, so that was submitted last week. I haven't got the value to hand, but I'm happy to share what we requested. It was based on the revised forecast outturn and a daily cash assessment over that quarter.
And the last quick question is, could we actually see the cash plan that underpins all this?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Okay, any other questions for Katie? So, self-evidently, it's normal for a trust which is running a deficit to seek these loan facilities, and if we don't, we can't pay the bills. So, but as Katie says, it needs to be minuted. So, on the basis of the circulation, the final numbers coming out from Katie, if you're not happy to approve that request for cash funding, please raise a digital hand. Okay, duly approved. Thank you, Katie, and thank you for your hard work. So we'll move then into the in-year operational plan review, which goes to the issue of our forecast, which is for approval, albeit we've had to submit it anyway. Katie, what would you care to pull out of this?
Thank you, Chair. So we've alluded to it in the meeting already in terms of NHS England writing to the service broadly on the 8th of November, and that letter is attached as part of the papers today. So this report is the report that summarises the implications of that and set out our revised financial and operational performance and projection for the rest of this year. As you said, Chair, due to the nationally prescribed deadline, Board were asked in line with our standing orders to endorse this ahead of the deadline of the 21st of November, and it's reported today for ratification. But I just wanted to draw out a couple of key elements and where we're at today, and Andy may want to comment on the operational performance side. In terms of the money, so as we've said, we'd already started work on a mid-year review, taking stock of where we were and what that meant for the forecast, and we aligned the two exercises into one, given the timelines. What the report sets out is that based on that performance in the first half of the year and prior to mitigation, our unmitigated forecast suggested we would be up to £10 million adverse to plan. As a result of the review work that we've undertaken and clarification of the national funding assumptions, we've been able to identify a series of mitigations which are set out in the paper and reduce that forecast outturn gap to around £4 million at this point. The two key drivers for that variance in the forecast are primarily difficulty around an alternative tariff model for our Welsh activity and the stretch efficiency target that we took as part of the planning cycle, which remains unmitigated due to those pressures that we've experienced in year. Glenn's just updated on the progress in terms of the conversations with the national team and the review meeting this week. As it stands today, I don't envisage any further mitigations that will move the forecast outturn beyond the numbers that are presented today, although we will continue to go around that loop and, as Glenn's just described, look at agency and any other options for us to continue to improve that number. And clearly with the next phase of industrial action recently announced, there remains significant risk in terms of the assumptions that led to this forecast and what we're now experiencing. Just in terms of how this gets reported externally, so we're currently undertaking the month 8 close down process, and given that the national review work around the forecast remains ongoing, we won't be formally revising the forecast ahead of conclusion of those national reviews. So we're anticipating that formal reporting of the revised forecast occurring through the national processes during month 9. Andy, was there anything you wanted to pull out in terms of the operational performance aspects?
Andy?
Thank you, Katie. Yeah, the only thing that we've adjusted slightly was our UEC 4-hour performance measure at the beginning of the year. We stated we would deliver 76 by the end of March. We've reviewed that based on the fact that we are a type 1 consultant-led only ED department, and we don't have any type 3 walk-in centres, minor injuries units or urgent treatment centres. And with agreement with the ICB, we've reflected our position to deliver a 70% position by the end of March. Outside of that, delivering our long waiters, delivering our cancer standards and maintaining our core general and adult bed base remains static, as we originally stated at the beginning of the year.
Thanks, Andy. Questions and perspectives? We're running late, guys, but Glenn?
Just wanted to add one further layer of information that certainly was discussed in the national meeting. I referenced earlier the additional funding from the government to support industrial action and other cost pressures. That is from the English government. There is an issue relating to the activity we deliver for Wales, mainly Powys, and so we're part of the resolution to our financial challenge will be to pursue some additional funding to cover that from the Welsh Government.
Yeah, and I was going to mention that, Glenn. As I understand it, depending on how you calculate it, we're owed something like 2.3 to 5 million for the work we do in Wales. So it for members of the public to be aware, it's not a trivial number. And Ian?
Thank you. Two quick reflections. I think somewhere in the paper it talks about mid-year review, and it's just pointing out the reality that actually we're well beyond mid-year and actually fast approaching last quarter. So it's just to acknowledge that actually our ability to make significant changes in spend is limited by that factor. Then the second point is obviously we have focused absolutely on our elective challenge in the current year. And I was very conscious when word of the letter came out that actually it could have undermined what we were doing. Actually, we've got all our staff absolutely focused on this. So I'm very pleased that we've found a way of actually saying, no, we're sticking with the plan, we're sticking with what we're doing and putting patients first, notwithstanding we have got these additional financial challenges. So absolutely support that.
No, thank you, Ian. So we've already signed off this for members of the public. But just for minute purposes, if anyone isn't happy to approve, please raise a digital hand. Okay, let's try and get some money out of Powys. That would be great, would help us for the year end. We've then got the full business case for the integrated energy solution, which we've discussed a number of times in different forums. But Alan?
I will just briefly introduce this and highlight 2 or 3 issues around it. I got on the call Christian Homsley, Associate Chief Estates Officer, to support me as part of any questions, and Clive Andrews, Senior Finance Manager, who supported the financial appraisal of this. This scheme will deliver greener energy for the county hospital site. It will cover 95% of the site with the first phase that we've already delivered. And as we've said, we've had this, we've had various iterations of this scheme up before the board in the past. It's funded by a grant, a national grant from government. It reduces over 3,000 tonnes of carbon on our site. The location for the building is in the paper. It's on the Orchard site, very much near the front of the site by Curl Street. Planning permission has been submitted for the site, so that's all in train. It works via a water-to-water and air source heat pumps, and will deliver heat to the site through electricity. It requires an upgrade of our effectively the substation coming onto site, because we will be doing away with gas, and we'll obviously need a greater supply of electricity. So we're having to upgrade that system, and that the element of this business case is covered in here, but is at our risk. Now, some of the issues around this are firstly the cost benefit analysis, and there is a a table in the document that sets that out in a variety of scenarios. And obviously the energy costs and the energy sector has got massive fluctuations at the moment. When we presented the OBC to you earlier in the year, there was a limited loss in the short term and a larger gain in the longer term. We've since asked our supplier for their very latest costs for gas and electricity, and as it stands at the moment, this will cost us more in the short term in this model, and it will change, but it's forecasted about 360k extra a year. But actually in the longer term, against some of the industry standard forecasts that we're seeing, it could be saving us upwards of £1 million. So there's a short-term issue and potentially some big long-term gains here as well. The other issue for it is actually was alluded to by Katie earlier in the finance report, is around the phasing of the funding here. We are underspent this year, we will overspend next year. As it currently stands, we're looking at ways to a sort of technical accounting way of dealing with that and taking that money from one year to the next, but we don't have a full resolution for that at the moment. We're working through that. Then finally, in terms of sort of financial risk, the operational expenditure costs of this solution are significant, about 164k a year. And that would be payable to Centrica, who are our partners on this particular scheme. Now, we expect that will be offset by the reduction in the costs of our existing infrastructure on this site, which is currently sat in a PFI contract. Now, we're working with our PFI partners to work out to disaggregate those costs from the contract. But as you might imagine with something like that, it will take some time. We don't have those costs in here. We expect those costs to offset the Centrica cost of operating the new system, but we can't demonstrate with any certainty to the board today that that's the case, and therefore there's a risk around that, but we expect that to be the case. So all in all, this is a really exciting opportunity for the Trust. It's the second phase of what we've already been doing. It will take us a long way to delivering net zero carbon for the estate on this site, and a greener source of energy for the site. We really will be at the forefront of this, and I will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. We have been at the forefront, to be honest, of our drive towards net zero as a team, and I'm very, very proud of it. I think the reality is if gas prices remain low and electricity prices are high, we're out of the money. If, as expected, gas prices go up and electricity prices fall over time, we're in the money. That's the key uncertainty on this. Any discuss this a lot, team. Any questions or perspectives, Glenn?
Yeah, very supportive of this. It's absolutely the right thing to do. I have flagged that issue of the pricing difference right now with politicians as well, because I think it shouldn't cost us more money to decarbonise the NHS.
No, absolutely. Nicola?
Yes, very happy to support. That's my issue was going to be, and I think I raised it back in August. We're now having some pre-board meetings with some of these meatier business cases, whereas Ned's, I think Sharon, Kieran and myself with Katie and Alan have had a real chance to put them through the ringer with a few questions on this. And I just think from a governance point of view, it'd be really good that we could, within the minutes, hold a summary of the questions and the answers that we got. I mean, if we could do that in advance and send them out with the minutes, I think it would be good, but probably impractical given it was only last week we had the meeting. But I just think somewhere we need to record that we have scrutinised this plan and asked those wider questions.
Good idea, Nicola. Thank you. Okay, so lots of positive comments in the chat box. Katie?
Yeah, thank you. So I guess just building on other comments, because given the financial challenges with which we're operating, you will appreciate this is a difficult one. And so I am absolutely supportive, as others have said, of this being the right thing for us to do. But it clearly creates a tension for the organisation to mitigate in 24-25 in terms of that short-term challenge in the event that those energy prices don't change. So I think it's just ensuring we've called that out and everybody's clear that will require mitigation moving forward.
Yeah, no, I think Alan was clear on that. Okay, so if you're not happy to approve this, please raise a digital hand. Duly approved. Exciting times. Well done, team. Thank you. If we can pick up this the time a bit, guys, because we're now about half an hour running over. Lucy, I don't think has been able to rejoin us, so I will pass over Lucy's papers and hopefully be able to come back to that. So we'll go down to 7.2 and the policy panel update. Erica?
Nothing to add really, Chair. It's the routine list that we provide as to what policies have been reviewed and updated during the period. Happy to take any questions.
Any questions to Erica on the policy panel update? Okay, thank you, Erica. Then the health, safety and wellbeing report, Erica.
Yeah, this report aligns with Health and Safety Executive guidance. Just the points to draw out from it really is one of the top 5 incidents was down as unsafe clinical environment, and given the conversation at the workshop this morning when we considered any updates to the estate strategy, it's worth pointing out that those unsafe clinical environment incidents in the main relate to adverse or extreme weather events, and so it's useful that we're aligning the estate strategy with the requirements for climate change and the challenges going forward. And indeed, climate change is mentioned within the report. Something else to draw out is we have had a large number of construction events on site, which we have got through without major incident, although they are ongoing. And we continue to work together with the estate staff and the contractors to ensure safe working practices. What is unfortunate within the report is the increase that we're seeing in violence and aggression. Some of this is down to we've reinforced to staff that they should have zero tolerance and they need to report incidents. But I think any one incident is one too many. So we've established a security meeting that's chaired by Alan, and we've taken lots of measures. Staff wear body cam, we've got CCTV linked up to the police station, yet we're still seeing an increase, and that's where Alan's security committee is working with the police and other partner agencies to how we can reduce those levels of violence and aggression and ensuring that they don't happen and we do enforce our zero tolerance policy. That's it for me, Chair.
No, thank you very much, Erica. Any questions or perspectives to Erica? Francis?
Thanks, Erica. I just wanted to give our support to you and Alan and the team. Our staff and other members of the public have the right to be safe in our care, and we will not tolerate people who abuse that. We are sympathetic for people in distress, but expect people to behave with dignity and respect to everybody around them.
No, it's exactly the point I was going to make, Francis. No one has a right to come into our trust when we're trying to look after you or a loved one and abuse a member of staff who's doing their utmost in very stressful circumstances. There is zero excuse for that. So the work that we're doing in this area is disproportionately important. And no member of the public, no matter how stressed they are, has a right to be abusive or threatening in any way to any members of staff. And equally in the same regard, any member of staff who suffers racial or any other abuse, that is wholly unacceptable, and we will not tolerate it, and we will take all possible steps we can. That people who undertake those type of behaviours are held to account. Jane?
I'd echo that in terms of our stance is absolutely right, but I would draw, I think, a causal link with congested ED, very long waits, fear, frustration for our patients as well. So it's not an apologist for that and an acceptance that it's okay, but I think there is a causal link, and us reducing some of the pressure and stress in those areas, I think will also have an impact on violence and aggression as well.
I'm sure that is the case, Jane, but no one has an excuse. When someone is doing something and doing their best to help you, it is unacceptable to be impolite, rude or threatening. There is no excuse for that. I know things are stressful. Everyone on this call has been in an ED department with a loved one where we've been in a panic and things aren't happening as quickly as we would like. But there's no reason to be threatening. Grace?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanting to pick up on your point, Erica, about the climate crisis and the mitigations. Obviously, we discussed this earlier, but I think it's really important, in addition to things like hydration and aircon, we also looked at other countries who perhaps have had to be dealing with the impacts of climate breakdown for some years already, and the mitigations that they use beyond aircon, because aircon is not the only solution, and it can itself cause high costs and contribute to more climate breakdown through carbon emissions. And just also to say thank you, Chair, for hearing your comments. I think, personally helps me feel safer to think about there's this, a policy that we know that isn't tolerated. So it's really good, I'm sure, for others to hear that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do take on Jane's point, but at the end of the day, if you give people, anyone, and it includes me, if I'm being, if I think my behaviours can be excused, then you get into a different mindset. We should always be respectful. Civility saves lives, and it saves lives with our staff as well. If you're civil to them, if you give them a sense of, I know you're doing your best, thank you. It enables them to perform at their best. If they're feeling threatened or anxious, it always makes it more difficult to perform at your best. Thank you, Erica. So we will duly note that report. We've got Amy with us. So Amy, we'll go back to the CNST 10 board progress update. Over to you, Amy.
Hello, thank you. So I will consider that the report has been read. It's not a particularly lengthy report. CNST, as you know, is a challenging set of safety actions, 10 actions, but each with sub-actions within them to roll out. And last year we were delighted to have achieved compliance with all 10 safety actions, and the team here have been working towards the same target this year. The paper outlines a couple of points really just to take note of. It identifies areas that we perceive ourselves to be compliant at this point, and that is all subject to LMS verification through the evidence checks that they do, and we are very fortunate to have their eye in terms of quality assurance. And the paper also asks for delegation. So what we're asking is that delegation of sign-off of particular points that are outlined in bold within the report is delegated to the safety champions, to the non-executive director, which is Frances Martin, to Lucy as the executive safety champion, and to Ian as the chair of quality committee. And the request for delegation is based on timings and the structure of the board reports that we have and the board meetings that we have. I know that January meeting is a quad board, and so in order for this to be done properly, we're asking that it can go through alternative channels with members of the trust board present, and then obviously report back for the final CEO sign off. Within the report, the only area really that gives us some concern, and we're just waiting for some confirmation, is Saving Babies' Lives. So Saving Babies' Lives is almost a separate entity in its own right, but is considered within CNST. We have had an interim check with our LMS colleagues. We need to achieve 70% overall and a minimum of 50% compliance in each of the 6 domains of Saving Babies' Lives. We're currently at an overall percentage of 56%, and our diabetes element 6 of the pack, we're not achieving the 50% yet, but we do have very clear plans and timelines in place, so we are hoping and expecting to achieve compliance with all of those elements, and we're working very rapidly and positively towards declaring compliance with all 10 again this year.
Super, thank you very much, Amy. Any questions to Amy on the CNST update? Amy, I'm sure you know, all of the maternity units in the foundation group are rated as good by CQC. Really, really proud of you and the team. Please take our thanks back to your colleagues. Would you be happy, we've obviously read it, but in Lucy's absence, to take any questions on the maternity services quality report? Anything you particularly wanted to emphasise on that, Amy, or do you want to go
just to provide an update on maternity triage, that we're expecting it to be handed back to us in the next 2 weeks, and we're really grateful for the team for pushing that work. We understand there's a convoluted system with many barriers, but to see the work taking place now is really positive, and we know that the other elements that we've been sitting on with our core team and our policies around it will now enable us to see the differences that we were anticipating. So really just wanted to focus on that, and just to focus on our workforce and staffing, that our workforce is now in such a place that throughout December and January we're not offering or requiring any bank or agency shifts. We've now been able to refer to the bank team that we will not be putting out any shifts to agency at all, unless through exceptional circumstances and a more scrutinised sort of way. That's not to say we weren't previously, but we had so many vacancies that once they weren't filled, they would routinely go out. So that routine going out to agencies completely ceased. So we're hoping to be able to maintain that now as a status quo.
Perfect, thank you. Any questions to Amy on the maternity quarterly report? Francis just popped into chat box about a good stream of students as well coming through. That's what we like to hear. Okay, thank you very much, Amy. Thank you for your hard work, and if we don't see you before Christmas, have a lovely Christmas. Well done. We'll move then, and hopefully Lucy will be able to join us to do the CQC action plan, but if she's not, I'll cover that off later. We'll go then down to 7.41 with the committee summary reports, and the first is a Foundation Group Strategy Committee. Glenn, I assume you'll take this as read? And Glenn's
sorry, I was nodding. Sorry, Chairman. Yes, if we could take this as read.
Yeah, sorry, I've got it on speaker. I can't see people nodding. Any questions to Glenn on the Foundation Group Strategy Subcommittee meeting? Great to have the Worcestershire team now around that table. And the Integrated Care Executive November meeting. Francis?
Happy to take the report as read and take any questions if there are any from colleagues.
Any questions from colleagues? We did talk, members of the public, with our primary care colleagues about the benefits we could see going forwards of joint appointments across the system, and I think that's going to be one of the things for us to pursue in the next calendar year. So if there are no questions to Francis, I'll thank Francis for all of her hard work, and we'll move on then to the Quality Committee minutes of the 28th of September and the 26th of October. Ian, is there anything you particularly like to pull out?
The only thing I wanted to emphasise, Chair, is in the September summary where we received a suite of patient feedback reports on cancer, from cancer patients, from ED patients and from inpatients. And the one real positive I wanted to highlight is in the inpatient feedback, where 50% of the indicators actually feedback had improved compared to the year before, and 25% had stayed the same. So a real positive set of results on the whole from our inpatient survey.
No, great, well said, Ian, and thank you, Lucy, and everyone involved in the front line of delivering that. Any questions or perspectives to Ian? Okay, so then I think we're down to the Foundation Group Board minutes, and are there any questions on the accuracy of these minutes? Please raise a digital hand. Okay, and then in terms of the action points arising, we'll come back to those in our February full board meeting, but they relate to the areas of analysis and theatre utilisation data, as well as the chief people officers looking at the female to male pay gap. Any questions on those action points? Okay, super. For some strange reason, they're in a different place, but the Minutes of the meetings, quality and assurance meetings, of the 31st of August and the 28th of September. I assume we've covered that off, Ian, haven't we?
Yes, we have. I was going to suggest actually, because actually, yeah, the summary reports are detached from the minutes, and actually the months don't tie either, because of the timing of the meetings. But I would suggest in future what we'll do is link the summary reports to the minutes. So it's actually it's an easier item to cover. Yeah,
I agree, Ian. That would be super if you could do that. That'd be helpful. Okay, Lucy hasn't been able to join us, so we'll just go back up to the CQC action plan of the 711, which I will take as read. It's a short report. Any questions on that, colleagues? So I think we're then on to any other business. Any other business, colleagues? Please raise a digital hand. I would just like, as a matter of public record, to again thank Frank for his enormous contribution over the last 12 years. And as this is the last board before Christmas, to say to members of staff, particularly those who are working, and in particular those who are working if a junior doctor strike occurs in the new year, thank you very, very much for everything you do day in, day out. And your families as well in trying to provide the best possible care to the citizens of Herefordshire. Thank you. Frank?
Yeah, it's been a great privilege, guys. I just wish you all the very best in your future endeavours. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. And then we've got questions from members of the public. I think our friend Chris, Erica, has asked a question. Erica, would you be so kind as to read it out?
Yes, Chair. It was interesting reading the summary of our workforce by Geoffrey in the board papers. The question relates to international recruitment of nurses and midwives. I understand that there is a red list of countries, nations that have their own pressing health challenges from which it would be unethical to recruit from. I understand that government guidance specifically prohibits recruitment from these countries. However, some NHS trusts are still accepting recruits from these countries. Has the Wye Valley Trust Board, or will the Wye Valley Trust Board, give an undertaking not to recruit from red list countries?
Thank you, Chris. Geoffrey?
Thanks. I mean, I can confirm that we follow the NHS Code of Practice for international recruitment, and we do not recruit our international staff from those red list countries, and we've got no intention of doing so anytime in the future.
Very clear. Thank you, Geoffrey, and thank you for the question, Chris. Okay, well, the next meeting of our board is on the 7th of March. There is a full board meeting at the beginning of February where all 4 boards come together. I would encourage members of the public to come along and listen into that. It is a different style of board meeting where we compare issues across all 4 trusts, and so it's illuminating in a different way. But in the meantime, Merry Christmas to all members of the public. Don't forget to leave a mince pie and a carrot out for Rudolph, and the mince pie and milk out for Santa Claus. And for board colleagues, we'll have a 10-minute break and do the confidential board at 2:30. Thank you very much.